Welcome back. From the foundation of the Roman Republic in 509 BCE to the fall of the Roman Empire in 1453 CE, Rome, in its various forms, influenced the politics and development of Europe and Central Asia for 1,960 years. Roman law laid the foundations for legal frameworks in many European countries. The concepts of justice, property rights, and legal procedures influenced the development of modern legal systems. The Romans excelled in building roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, which facilitated trade, communication, and urbanization. This infrastructure influenced the layout and connectivity of cities in Europe and beyond. Roman culture, including language, literature, art, and philosophy, spread throughout Europe and parts of Asia, shaping educational and cultural norms that persist today. The concept of republicanism and centralized governance, introduced by Rome, influenced various political systems and the evolution of nation-states in Europe, impacting democratic practices. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, it became a major vehicle for the spread of the religion throughout Europe, profoundly affecting cultural practices, ethics, and societal values across the continent and influencing Central Asia. If you grow up within a structure that has lasted for nearly 2,000 years and has had such a profound impact on the world in which you live, it must be hard not to see that structure as permanent, as being just the way the world is. But as we sometimes forget, all things must pass. Nothing is permanent. During Roman triumphs, a specific tradition included a reminder of the impermanence of success. A slave would stand beside the emperor during the procession, holding a laurel crown and repeatedly whispering, "Memento mori," remember you must die, serving as a reminder that despite the glory of the moment, all achievements and successes are ultimately temporary. As it is for emperors, so it is too with empires. After nearly 2,000 years of change and evolution, the empire of the Romans was at an end. A new empire was about to replace it. Up to Mehmed II's birth in 1432, the Ottomans had grown from a small frontier beylik, a type of administrative region established by Turkish leaders or beys, into a significant regional power in both Anatolia and the Balkans. Osman I, a Turkic frontier leader operating under the loose authority of the Seljuk Sultans of Rum, began expanding his domain in northwestern Anatolia at the end of the 13th century, taking advantage of Byzantine weaknesses and the disruption caused by Mongol invasions. His son Orhan captured important Byzantine towns, consolidated control over Bithynia, and turned the dynasty into a structured principality with a standing army and administrative institutions. By the mid-14th century, under Orhan and then Murad I, the Ottomans had crossed into Europe, seizing Gallipoli and advancing across Thrace, which laid the foundations for their later Balkan Empire. Murad I shifted the capital to Adrianople and pushed further into the Balkans, defeating Serbian and Bulgarian forces, bringing much of the central Balkans under Ottoman suzerainty and securing a steady flow of tribute and manpower for the empire. His successor, Bayezid I, continued rapid expansion, subduing remaining Anatolian beyliks and defeating a crusading army at Nicopolis in 1396. But his defeat and capture by Tamerlane at Ankara in 1402 shattered this first phase of imperial growth and plunged the realm into a decade-long civil war among Bayezid's sons. Order was restored by Mehmed I, who reunited the core territories, and then by Murad II, under whom the Ottomans resumed expansion in the Balkans, and even attempted a major siege at Constantinople in 1422. So that by the time Murad's son Mehmed II was born in Adrianople in 1432, the dynasty had already become a major Eurasian power, encircling the Byzantine capital. Mehmed II, later renowned as the Conqueror for reasons that will become obvious, was born on the 30th of March 1432. He grew up in a palace environment, receiving a thorough education in Islamic theology, languages such as Arabic and Persian, as well as history and military sciences, reflecting his dynasty's expectation that princes be both scholars and warriors. Following established Ottoman practice, he was sent as a child to govern the province of Manisa in western Anatolia under the supervision of tutors and senior officials, an arrangement intended to train him in administration while keeping him at a safe distance from court intrigues. These formative years instilled in him a strong sense of imperial mission and exposed him to frontier politics on the edge of Byzantine and Latin Christian territories. In 1444, when Mehmed was about 12, his father briefly abdicated and placed him on the throne at Adrianople, making the boy sultan formally ruler of a realm facing powerful Christian coalitions led by Hungary, Venice, and the papacy. Senior statesmen, notably grand viziers, effectively governed in his name, but a crisis forced Murad II back to power, and Mehmed's first reign ended after roughly 2 years. This abrupt displacement taught him harsh lessons about internal opposition and the dangers of appearing weak when confronting external threats. After his removal, he returned to Manisa, where he continued his studies and deepened his interest in classical and Islamic histories of world conquerors, nurturing an ambition to emulate figures such as Alexander the Great. When Mehmed succeeded to the throne again in 1451 upon his father's death, he was now an experienced young prince, determined to assert his authority over both his officials and his rivals abroad. He quickly consolidated power, securing truces with Venice and Hungary to neutralize immediate threats, while he pursued a larger strategic goal, the capture of Constantinople. To prepare for this campaign, Mehmed devoted himself to strengthening the Ottoman navy and building up heavy artillery, and in 1452 he constructed the great fortress of Rumelihisar on the European shore of the Bosphorus, tightening Ottoman control over the strait and isolating Constantinople by sea. By the spring of 1453, he was ready to begin the siege that would fulfill the imperial vision he had nurtured since youth. Constantine XI Palaiologos was born in Constantinople on the 8th of February 1405 into a world already shaped by the rise of Mehmed II's Ottoman ancestors. Like Mehmed, he belonged to a long-established ruling house, but whereas Mehmed inherited a dynamic, expanding sultanate, Constantine grew up in an empire reduced to its capital, the Peloponnese, and a handful of islands. Both men were trained from youth in warfare and governance, yet Constantine's early career, serving as regent for his brother John VIII and then as despot of the Morea, revolved around salvaging fragments of a declining state rather than directing a confident imperial project. In this respect, he resembled Mehmed in sense of duty and personal austerity, but not in the scale of opportunity available to him. As despot of the Morea, Constantine showed energy and initiative similar to Mehmed's later drive. He rebuilt the Hexamilian Wall across the Isthmus of Corinth with his brother Thomas, extended Byzantine control over most of the Peloponnese for the first time since the Fourth Crusade, and led campaigns into central Greece and Thessaly in the mid-1440s. Mehmed, preparing to Constantinople, likewise invested heavily in fortifications and siege preparations, but with the aim of expansion rather than defence. Constantine's diplomacy through marriages, treaties, and careful management of rival Greek and Latin lords parallels Mehmed's calculated truces and alliances, but Constantine always operated under the Ottoman shadow and fiscal weakness, while Mehmed commanded growing tax bases and a centralised military system. In personality, both men appear pragmatic and willing to mix negotiations with force, but Constantine's room for manoeuvre was constrained by internal Byzantine divisions and Western unreliability in a way Mehmed never experienced. When Constantine became emperor in 1449, he faced challenges that mirror Mehmed's from the opposite side, consolidating legitimacy and preparing for a decisive struggle over the city. Like Mehmed, he relied on trusted advisors and tried to balance powerful factions at court, especially over the contentious issue of church union with Rome. Mehmed, by contrast, could act more autocratically within a largely Muslim elite that, although not without rivalries, was more cohesive around the goal of conquest. Both rulers sought foreign support. Constantine turned to Western Christendom and the papacy, accepting the unpopular church union in hopes of military aid, while Mehmed manoeuvred diplomatically to secure his borders and neutralize potential Christian coalitions. The key difference is that Mehmed's diplomacy brought him time to strengthen an already formidable machine, whereas Constantine's produced little concrete help and deepened domestic opposition. While Rumilihi-Saru was going up in 1452, the mood in Constantinople was one of mounting anxiety and near despair, mixed with political paralysis and a vain hope that the West might still intervene. The fortress openly signalled that Mehmed II intended to strangle the city by cutting Black Sea traffic and any relief from Genoese colonies, so Constantinopolitans saw it as the noose tightening around them. As its walls rose in a matter of months at the Bosphorus's narrowest point, it became clear that this was no bluff, but preparation for a final decisive siege. Constantine XI and his court were financially exhausted and diplomatically weak, relying on appeals to Western powers that produced only limited, hesitant aid. Inside the city, there were divisions between those who favoured union with Rome to gain help and those who opposed it, contributing to a sense of helplessness and gridlock as the fortress on the other side of the Bosphorus neared completion. For many inhabitants, the looming fortress symbolised not just Ottoman power, but the approaching end of the Byzantine capital, deepening the city's grim and fearful mood. Once Rumilihi-Saru began enforcing a blockade, including firing on ships and executing crews who tried to run it, news of these incidents spread terror and confirmed that war was now inevitable. In the final months before the 1453 siege, Constantine and Mehmed showed parallel qualities of determination and personal courage. Constantine oversaw repairs to the Theodosian walls, stockpiled food as far as the straitened finances allowed, and personally commanded a garrison of roughly 7,000 men against an army perhaps 10 times larger. Mehmed, meanwhile, brought massive artillery, a large fleet, and a well-organised army, and he personally supervised engineering works and assaults on the city. It's easy to overdo this parallel narrative, but it's clear both men shared a willingness to risk their lives at the point of decision. Constantine fought and died in the breaches during the final Ottoman assault, while Mehmed rode into the conquered city as its new ruler, having staked his prestige on success. In ethos, they were surprisingly similar. Hard-working, personally brave, and deeply conscious of historical destiny. But circumstances made one the founder of a new imperial epoch and the other the last defender of an old one. The Ottoman bombardment of Constantinople began on April 6, 1453, marking the start of the siege. The Ottomans used massive cannons, most notably the Basilica cannon, also known as the Great Bombard, designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban. This was one of the biggest cannons of its time, measuring about 8 feet or 2.5 meters in diameter and requiring a crew of about 200 men to operate it. The Basilica cannon had a relatively slow firing rate due to its size and the logistics involved in loading it and firing it. It could fire approximately one shot every 30 to 50 minutes, depending on the conditions and the crew's proficiency. Loading the cannon was a complicated process that involved cleaning the barrel, inserting a powder charge, and then loading the massive stone ball, which required significant manpower and time. Heat was also an issue during the operation of the cannon and other large artillery pieces used in the siege. Firing large cannons like the Basilica cannon generated massive heat within the barrel. This could lead to increased wear on the cannon's materials and potential deformation of the barrel if it fired too quickly without cooling periods. Crews would often need to allow the cannon to cool between firings, pouring water on the barrel, although this had to be done carefully to avoid damaging it, which contributed to the already slow rate of fire. Excessive heat could also increase the risk of premature explosions of gunpowder within the cannon. This needed careful management to ensure that the cannon was safely loaded and fired. So the firepower of the Basilica cannon was significant, but its low rate of fire meant that it was typically used in a strategic and focused manner during the siege. In addition to the basilica, the Ottomans used several other large and medium-sized cannons that were effective in battering the city walls, including smaller artillery pieces that could fire at a higher rate. The cannons fired huge stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds, capable of causing significant damage to the thick walls of Constantinople. The initial bombardment focused on weakening the city's walls, particularly the Theodosian walls, which had protected Constantinople for centuries. Targeting specific sections of the walls allowed the Ottomans to create breaches for infantry assaults. The bombardment continued almost daily throughout the siege and had a devastating psychological effect on the defenders, creating relentless fear, exhaustion, and despair. Eyewitnesses emphasize how the constant noise, destruction, and Ottoman ferocity eroded morale over the 53-day siege. One account describes the cannon's thunder causing citywide panic. The whole city was in a state of panic and everyone was in tears after heavy barrages, with women and children weeping while carrying stones for repairs. He notes the terrifying number of fires and shouting combined with gunpowder made the skies seem to split, amplifying dread. Night repairs under fire left defenders weary and fearful of assault. Witnesses say the emperor mourned bitterly, fearing attacks when unprepared, and the garrison felt overcome with fear after naval setbacks. Accounts convey a sense of inevitable doom. After breaches were made in the walls, the wretched people felt themselves to have been taken already, with the emperor entrusting the city to God and saints amid perceived Western betrayal. The final pre-assault barrage spread fear throughout the city and took away our courage, one wrote. A detailed, fully source-backed narrative of Constantine XI's last day has to distinguish clearly between what is reasonably well attested and what rests on later contradictory or legendary reports. The best regarded contemporary or near contemporary witnesses are the Venetian doctor Niccolo Barbaro, who kept a diary during the siege, the papal legate Leonard of Chios, the Byzantine official George Sforantzis, and a small group of Greek, Latin and Ottoman chroniclers. But even their accounts differ on crucial points, especially the emperor's exact movements and his death. As best we can tell, Constantine spent the night of the 28th to the 29th of May 1453 in spiritual preparation and logistical planning, aware that the long Ottoman bombardment had opened serious breaches near the gate of St. Romanos and that a general assault was imminent. Barbaro describes the emperor weeping bitterly because Western aid had not come, and then commending himself and the city to Christ, the Virgin, and the city's patron saints. In the early hours of 29th of May, probably shortly after midnight, Mehmed II's forces began their final multi-wave attack, with irregular troops, Anatolian contingents, and then the elite Janissaries thrown against the land walls where Constantine and the main Byzantine Latin garrison were concentrated. Contemporary narratives agree that Constantine personally took command in the most threatened sector along the Lycus Valley and the gate of St. Romanos, alongside the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani and other leading captains, which matches the broader pattern of Constantine's active participation in earlier sorties and repairs. For a time, the defenders held. Various eyewitnesses describe repeated Ottoman assaults being repulsed in the darkness, fierce fighting at the outer defences, and the emperor moving on the walls to encourage his men. Shortly after dawn, however, Giustiniani was badly wounded and withdrew towards the harbour. Several accounts, including Barbara's, stress that this departure caused panic and disorganisation, leaving Constantine with fewer reliable troops at precisely the moment when the Ottomans renewed their most powerful assault. The climax of Constantine's final day comes in the confused reports of the final breach and his death. Most Greek and Western sources agree in general outline that as parts of the defence collapsed near the main land gate, the emperor cast off or concealed his imperial insignia and fought on as an ordinary soldier, either in a last charge or in a desperate attempt to plug the gaps in the walls. Later Byzantine tradition emphasizes his refusal to flee and portrays him dying sword in hand amongst his men, while other sources relay second-hand claims that he was wounded and then overwhelmed and trampled by Ottoman attackers. Barbaro, often treated as one of the most sober witnesses, explicitly says he did not know what became of the emperor and reports only rumours, including the story that Constantine hanged himself when the Turks broke in, a version that modern scholars generally regard as unlikely. Ottoman narratives add yet another strand. One account has the emperor killed while trying to escape towards the harbour, and his head later presented to Mehmed, while other Muslim and Serbian-linked traditions attribute the beheading of a fallen imperial body to different individuals combing the battlefield after the fighting. Taken together, the sources support a cautious conclusion. Constantine XI almost certainly died on the morning of 29th of May 1453 while fighting near the main land wall breach, and his body was probably decapitated and displayed, but the exact manner of his last moments, the words he spoke, and the identity of his killer remain impossible to reconstruct. After his death, Constantine XI quickly entered legend as the Marble Emperor, a figure whom Greek folklore imagined sleeping beneath the city, destined someday to return. Mehmed became remembered instead as the Conqueror, a lawgiver and patron of arts and learning, the builder of a renewed imperial capital in Istanbul. Both legacies are heroic but stand in contrast. Constantine as tragic martyr and national symbol of resistance, Mehmed as triumphant architect of a new order. Their biographies intersect at Constantinople's walls, yet they embody opposite sides of the same turning point: the end of the Roman imperial line and the rise of the Ottoman one. For those outside of Constantinople, the death of the empire happened less suddenly. The fall of the city would likely not have resulted in immediate or drastic changes in their day-to-day lives. Social relations and community structures would remain largely intact, so daily life for many individuals would not be drastically altered at first. While the fall of the empire marked significant historical change, many inhabitants might not have felt an immediate impact in their daily lives. The broader social, cultural, and political transformations would unfold gradually over the ensuing years. News would have spread through messengers, traders, and travellers who relayed information about the significant events surrounding the fall, and many regions had local leaders or bureaucratic structures that would announce changes in power, bringing news of the empire's collapse and the rise of the Ottoman Empire to their subjects. But because they were semi-autonomous, they continued to function even after the empire's fall, maintaining a sense of stability for the population. Many daily economic activities, such as farming and trade, would continue with little immediate change, as local economies often operated independently of central authority once local systems were established. The transition of power to the Ottomans and the eventual changes in governance would likely occur gradually, allowing people time to adjust without significant disruptions. The presence or withdrawal of imperial troops would signal shifts in authority. As Ottoman forces took control, former Roman administrative and military structures would dissolve. Disruptions in trade, taxation, and currency stability would indicate a change in governance. Loss of protection and support from the empire would prompt local economies to adapt to new rulers. People usually adapt to new rulers over time. The blending of cultures and gradual acceptance of Ottoman customs and governance would occur without abrupt upheaval. Just as there had been after the sack of Constantinople in 1204, there were a few successor states that lived on for a few years, but they were eventually assimilated into the empires around them, and the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist. But while the reality of the empire disappeared, the influence did not. In the decades before 1453, there was a steady and then accelerating movement of Byzantine scholars, churchmen, and artists towards the cities of northern and central Italy, shaped by both opportunity and fear of Ottoman expansion. This migration didn't begin suddenly with the fall of Constantinople. Figures such as Manuel Chrysoloras were already teaching Greek in Florence at the turn of the 15th century, invited by humanists who wanted direct access to classical texts. The Council of Ferrara-Florence in 1438 and 1439, called to negotiate a church union between East and West, brought a large delegation of learned Greeks, including George Gemistos Platon, whose lectures on Plato sparked Cosimo de' Medici's founding of the Platonic Academy, and the future Cardinal Bessarion, into prolonged contact with Italian elites, and several chose to remain or return to Italy afterward. As Ottoman pressure mounted in the 1440s and early 1450s, more intellectuals, copyists and artists looked to Venice, Rome and other Italian centres as places of patronage and relative safety, carrying with them books, technical skills and a distinct educational tradition. Many of the most influential émigrés gravitated towards Italy's emerging humanist circles and helped reshape the curriculum and methods of the Italian Renaissance. Chrysalouros pioneered systematic teaching of Greek grammar and rhetoric in Florence, giving students like Leonardo Bruni tools to read Plato and other authors without relying on medieval intermediaries. Bessarion, who settled permanently in Italy after the council and became a cardinal, acted as a patron and mediator. He collected a vast library of Greek manuscripts, supported younger Greek refugees, and eventually bequeathed his collection to Venice, forming the core of the Bibliotheca Marciana. Other scholars, Theodore Gaza, George of Trebizond, John Argyropoulos, and later Demetrios Chalkondailes, produced authoritative Latin translations of Aristotle, Theophrastus, and other philosophers, standardizing texts that became central to university teaching across Europe. Their presence reinforced an already growing Italian interest in antiquity, but they added depth, more accurate Greek texts, better philology, and living models of classical style discourse that helped push Renaissance humanism beyond Latin revival towards a truly bilingual classical culture. Byzantine visual culture provided foundational models for early Renaissance painters, evident in the Maniera Greca style adopted by Cimabue, Duccio and Giotto, who blended Byzantine iconography, gold grounds, symbolic gestures and spiritual intensity with emerging naturalism. Venice's St. Mark's Basilica, with its mosaics echoing Constantinople's Holy Apostles, amplifies pre-1400 influence, while Duccio's Maesta from 1311 fused Byzantine hierarchy with innovative depth, paving the way for high Renaissance composition. So the fall of Constantinople intensified an already ongoing process, bringing a larger wave of émigré scholars and manuscripts to centres like Venice and Florence, reinforcing an existing Byzantine influence on the growing Renaissance. By the later 15th century, Greek learning transmitted by these former Byzantine intellectuals had become integral to Renaissance humanism, especially in philosophy and historical studies. Beyond Italy, Byzantium preserved Roman law, administration, and classical learning through the Middle Ages, acting as a cultural bridge that indirectly fed Europe's recovery. Its orthodox theology influenced Slavic states like Russia and Serbia, embedding Byzantine liturgy and icons in Eastern European identity long after 1453. Militarily, Byzantine innovations like Greek fire and the regional system delayed Islamic expansion into Europe, buying time for Carolingian and later developments. The empire's diplomatic sophistication, alliances, marriages, subsidies shaped medieval power politics, from the Crusades to Norman Sicily. Byzantium's libraries safeguarded works lost in the West, from Homer to Galen, which scholars carried to Italy and beyond, fueling scientific advances like Vesalius's anatomy. Byzantium's fall symbolized the end of antiquity, but catalyzed printing and scholarship as humanists raced to disseminate text before Ottoman disruption. Ultimately, Byzantium's role was catalytic, not the sole origin of the Renaissance, but a vital conduit blending antiquity, Christianity, and innovation across Europe. I mentioned it in passing just now, but Byzantium profoundly shaped Russian history, especially through religion, governance, and culture during its later centuries. This influence peaked under the Kievan Rus baptism in 988 under Vladimir I, see the episode on Basil II for more details, but persisted through the empire's decline and 1453 fall, when the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the principality that eventually expanded and became the Russian Empire, positioned itself as Orthodoxy's heir. Vladimir's conversion via Byzantine marriage and missionaries imported Orthodox rites, hierarchy and theology, creating the Russian Orthodox Church as a pillar of national identity. The Byzantine model of Caesaropapism, where one person is both head of state and head of the church, or when the state dominates the church so completely that religious authority becomes subordinate to political power, inspired Russian autocracy. Tsars adopted imperial titles. Caesar became Tsar in the Russian language and adopted imperial eagle symbols. After 1453, Philotheus' doctrine cast Moscow as the Third Rome, the successor to fallen Rome and Constantinople, legitimizing Ivan III's empire building and Orthodox universalism against the West. Iconography, domed architecture, and Justinian's legal codes spread early, but refugees from 15th century Ottoman conquests brought codices, scholars, and printing, fueling a Muscovite renaissance. Byzantium even had a significant and lasting impact on Ottoman culture, particularly evident in architecture, administration, and court practices. The Ottomans, emerging in Byzantine borderlands, consciously adopted and adapted Greek-Roman traditions to legitimize their rule as Constantinople's successors. Ottoman mosques like the early Orhan Gazi in Bursa used Byzantine brick and stone masonry, banded arches, and spolia, recycled columns from churches, evolving into Sinan's masterpieces like Süleymaniye, which blended domes from Hagia Sophia with Islamic aesthetics. Hagia Sophia's conversion to Hagia Sophia symbolized this fusion, preserving mosaics while adding minarets. Greeks managed finances and principalities like Wallachia, Moldavia. The millet system echoed Byzantine communal autonomy. Sultans claimed Caesar-i Rum, Caesar of Rome, using double-headed eagles and Byzantine tax structures, while Janissaries built on Roman military precedents. Music incorporated Byzantine makams, Greek scales, melisma. Cuisine adopted Byzantine sweets and wines, and court ceremony mirrored Palaiologan splendor. Mehmed II spared scholars, fostering a Greco-Turkish elite that persisted until the 19th century. If I can speak personally for a moment, it's difficult to know where to stop here, and I don't really want to. Byzantine influences on the Italian Renaissance, Byzantine influences on the Ottoman Empire, Byzantine influences on Moscow and the development of the Russian Empire. I don't really want to let go and admit that realistically the history of the Byzantine Empire is done, as much as any history is ever truly done. But we've covered it from Constantinople's foundation under Constantine I to its fall under Constantine XI. Not in as much detail as we could, but hopefully in as much detail for you to gain an insight into why this most overlooked of empires is one of the most fascinating. I want to take a moment and highlight some of the books I found most useful in compiling this series. I'll put a full list in the notes. And full disclosure, I did call on the help of Perplexity and ChatGPT occasionally, just to help me understand some of the more arcane and complicated parts of Byzantium's history. The work, though, is my own, as are any mistakes and what are probably some truly awful mispronunciations of names. I apologize for them all. So that's it. We are done. Thank you for being here as I've ambled and rambled through a millennium and a bit of history. I hope you found at least some of it interesting and that it made you want to know a bit more. I'll be back soon with my third series, and this time in honour of March as Women's History Month, I'm going to try to redress the gender balance a little by looking purely at influential women in history. So there'll be no more emperors, at least for a while. I hope you'll join me for that, but for now, as I said, we're done. Please remember to like, share and subscribe on your way out, and whatever you're up to, until we meet again, Have a great day.